Hey everybody, it's James, coming to you from the shed. Um, I typed this study up twice on Facebook. Um, Made the mistake, I guess, of typing directly in to post instead of doing a Word file first and then I copy and paste it over because it's kind of lengthy. And Facebook dumped it both times, and I'm not going to sit and type the whole thing up a third time, so I'm out here verbalizing it and hoping that my internet connection holds up out here in the shed long enough to do this. Before I get started, I want to wish everyone a happy Sabbath. If you are not observing the day of rest because you think that Jesus is our day of he is our rest, as the Bible says, I had biscuits with my dinner tonight, and he's also the bread of life. Didn't stop me from eating those biscuits, and it's not stopping me from keeping the Sabbath. Speaking of metaphors, figurative language, let's talk about Sarah and Hagar, okay? This concept kind of came to me today, and it happens every now and then, and I liken it to a download of sorts. I don't claim prophetic revelation like Yahweh speaks to me directly or I hear an audible voice or anything like that, but every now and then something will trigger in my mind, and it does seem like a download, okay? That's kind of how this happens. So I'm going to present what I have here, and hopefully this will not be too abstract to where it can't be understood easily. Hopefully I will make this point pretty clearly and pretty concisely. I'm going to read the scriptures in question, Galatians chapter 4, starting in verse 21. Tell me, you who want to be under the law, under the Torah, Yahweh's commandments, do you not listen to the law? For it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by the bondwoman and one by the free woman. But the son by the bondwoman was born according to the flesh, and the son by the free woman through the promise. And this is allegorically speaking, for these women are two covenants. Covenants, very important. One from Mount Sinai, bearing children who are to be slaves. She is Hagar. Now, this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, which, interestingly enough, the Mount Sinai there at St. Catherine's Monastery on the Sinai Peninsula, the Sinai Peninsula was never considered part of Arabia. You actually have to go to Arabia, like Ron Wyatt did, to find the real Mount Sinai. A sidebar there. And she corresponds to the present Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of Paul's day. For she is in slavery with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother, for it is written, Rejoice, barren woman who does not bear. Break forth and shout, you who are not in labor. For more numerous are the children of the desolate than of the one who has a husband. And you, brethren, like Isaac, are children of promise. But as at that time he who was born according to the flesh, which was Ishmael, persecuted him who was born according to the Spirit, so it is now also. But what does the Scripture say? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be an heir with the son of the free woman. So then, brethren, we are not children of a bondwoman, but of a free woman. So Christianity interprets this as the free woman, Sarah, represents the new covenant, represents the new Jerusalem that you enter into if you are part of the new covenant, and is not under the law. Christians don't have to keep Yahweh's commandments. Now, Hagar, being a slave, because that's connected to Mount Sinai, we know what happened at Mount Sinai. That's where Yahweh gave those awful, horrendous, burdensome commandments to the Jews. Okay? That's taught in Christianity. He gave them to all of Israel, and in reality, he gave them to the mixed multitude, otherwise known as the Gentiles, who were there with Israel. Okay? So Hagar represents Mount Sinai and that covenant, or the old covenant, if you will. And Sarah represents the new covenant. But let's think a little bit about what covenant is as it relates to Abraham and Sarah. Okay? Now, a marriage covenant, as you may well know, hopefully, is an agreement between two people a man and a woman, and only a man and a woman, not a man and a man, not a woman and a woman, not, any variations on those. A man and a woman, that's marriage. It's a covenant between those two people, and it has terms. It has terms. You read them out loud during the marriage ceremony, and both parties say, I do, or I will. They agree to those terms. They are bound by the terms of those covenant. They're called your marriage vows. A vow has even more weight than a promise. We break promises all the time, but a vow is supposed to have a more binding type effect than a regular promise. Okay? So this is a wedding vow. It's a covenant between two people. And if you break that covenant, you are considered to be adulterous, which according to Yahweh's commandments is a capital punishable offense. It's that serious to him. Covenant is serious to our Creator. So, Sarah, the free woman, represents the New Jerusalem, represents the New Covenant, was married to her husband Abraham. That was a free will covenant that they entered into. Nobody forced Sarah to marry Abraham. It was a marriage. Okay, now some cultures do force that. Most cultures in the world do not, thankfully. It's a voluntary covenant between two people. Hagar, on the other hand, was a slave. She did not enter into covenant voluntarily with anyone. She was property of Sarah, and therefore had to do what Sarah told her unconditionally. So when Sarah got the bright idea that Yahweh was taking too long to fulfill his promise to provide Abraham an heir through her, because she was old, well, here's my younger female servant Hagar. We'll do it this way. She took action into her own hands to try to speed up the promise. Okay, Ishmael, Hagar's son, is the child of the flesh, as Paul says. Your flesh, Sarah's carnality, her lack of faith, prompted her to force Hagar into that relationship, but it was not a covenant relationship. Now, later on, Isaac comes along. Isaac is a son of the promise. He's the son that was promised to Yahweh. Yahweh himself actually caused Sarah to conceive in her old age, and she bore Isaac. He's the son of the promise that Paul's talking about. Now, interestingly enough, I want to read to you, we know our Bible says it many, many times, that Abraham's faith was counted to him or reckoned to him as righteousness. We know that he was chosen by Yahweh to enter into that covenant. Yahweh chose him as a covenant partner and a friend because of his faith. Let's take a look and see what that faith led to. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 26. We're going to go left of Matthew to explain Paul, which is something that Christianity almost never does. And that's why they don't understand this. We're going to read, this is when Yahweh is passing down the covenant of promise to Isaac. Okay, Isaac's a grown man at this point. Genesis chapter 26, I'll start reading in verse 4. I will multiply your, Isaac's, descendants as the stars of heaven, and will give your descendants all these lands. And by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed. Same thing he promised Abraham. Why? Because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws. That exact language you will find peppered all through the Torah, the law. And these are ways to describe the commandments that Yahweh verbalized from Mount Sinai, either directly to the people or through Moses. These are commandments that he gave through Moses later, after Mount Sinai. He gave a lot of commandments to Moses after Mount Sinai. Statutes and things, these are where they had a problem come up and the judges would go inquire of Yahweh, okay? Or they would just make a decision because the 70 judges were filled with his Holy Spirit. They were endowed with the wisdom to be able to make these interpretations that were legally binding upon the people. The entirety of that is what he's talking about here. Now, obviously, not all of those commandments given at Sinai were given to Abraham. All of the Levitical stuff, all of the tabernacle stuff, non-existent with Abraham. Levi hadn't been born yet. Okay? Yahweh apparently made some changes to his commandments, which as the lawgiver is his right. Abraham married his half-sister. That's forbidden in the Torah. Okay? It's against the law. You can't do it. Yahweh calls it, unclean. All right? But yet here Abraham is married to his half-sister. Something changed. Either way, whatever commandments that Yahweh had given Abraham, that he had made known to him in his lifetime, he kept steadfastly. And that's cited as a reason why Yahweh blessed Abraham and established this covenant with him. Now let's track back to Sarah. Paul tells us in his writings, he describes the hierarchy. It's like this: Yahweh the Father, Yahshua the Son, call him Jesus if you feel like you need to, even though it's technically incorrect and an impossibility, the husband, the wife, the children. Now, as you go down that hierarchy, if one person is obeying the person above them, and the person below them is obeying them, everybody is obedient up the ladder. So if a husband obeys Yahshua, who obeyed his father, then the husband is also obeying the father. If the wife obeys the husband, who is obeying Yahshua, who is obeying the father, then the wife is also obeying Yahshua and the father. If the children obey the wife and the husband, they are also obeying Yahshua and the father. Okay? We can understand this concept very easily from Paul's other writings. So where does that leave Sarah, the free woman? She was in covenant relationship with Abraham, and it was a voluntary covenant. She chose to marry Abraham. And we know that the way it is designed, the way marriage is designed, the husband is supposed to be the head of the wife, not the domineering slave master over the wife, but the authority. And if he is following the nature of his authority, Yahshua, Yahweh, then the loving nature of that authority will be passed down to his wife. She will be respected. She will be admired. She will be valued. But at the same time, she will be accountable to obey the words of her husband. Assuming that he's a righteous man, this benefits the wife. If he's an unrighteous man, it can do harm to the wife and to the children, obviously. So the onus is on us men to make sure that we are righteous, to make sure that we are clean, to make sure that we are above reproach, and that our children can look up to us as examples of good, clean living. Okay? Because that's what our higher-ups have done. That's what Yahshua demonstrated in his obedience to his father. Okay? So Sarah would have been obedient to her husband. She would have been in agreement with her husband, who kept Yahweh's commandments as a fruit of his obedience. So here we have Sarah, this free woman, who represents the new covenant, who represents the new Jerusalem, and she is voluntarily in covenant with a man, Abraham, and accordingly she is doing what her husband does, which is being obedient by faith to Yahweh. That kind of flips it on its head, doesn't it? Because Christianity teaches that, like, if Christianity were to actually interact with Sarah and Hagar, Christianity would tell Sarah, Paul said that you're a free woman. You're not under the law. You don't have to keep those commandments. Even though your husband is, apparently, you're free. Now, Hagar, on the other hand, she's a slave. She represents Mount Sinai, which is the old covenant for the Jews. So she has to keep it because she's a slave, but you're free. So you have the privilege of being lawless. That's really how it would amount to, even though every time the Bible talks about lawlessness, it's not a good thing. Okay? This is what Christianity would say if it was an entity that could interact with Sarah and Hagar, as they interpret that allegory. But when we look at how they would have lived, when we look at what the covenants would have meant to them, it's the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite. Now, I mentioned that Paul talked about the Jews of the present day. He talked about present day Jerusalem being Hagar, the slave. Why? Think about it at that time. You're a Jew born in Judea during the second temple era. Why are you keeping the commandments? Well, it's because you're a descendant of Abraham. It's expected of you. Your DNA says you're a Jew. You're from the tribe of Judah. Maybe you're not from the tribe of Judah. Maybe you're from the tribe of Benjamin like Paul. But you consider yourself a Jew because you've assimilated. You were born into that culture, really. And so you are expected from birth as a Jew to keep the commandments. Now, this is not only the written commandments we have in our Bibles, but this would have been the voluminous oral commandments that were passed down to the people by the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Okay? So you were expected to do all of these things by virtue of your DNA, the flesh. You weren't choosing to covenant with Yahweh. You weren't looking at the word and thinking, well, do I really want to covenant with him? You were doing it out of cultural and racial expectation and obligation. That's why there was such a backlash against people like Paul, because they were seen as betraying the tribe. They were forsaking this idea of racial DNA-based privilege. Because what did John the Baptist tell them? Yahweh can make sons of Abraham from the stones. You guys aren't guaranteed in just because you have the DNA. It's by faith. That's what Paul says all through. And when he talks about being under the law, he talks about the same thing in the previous chapter when he talks about the schoolmaster. The son goes from being under the schoolmaster, okay, and then he's out from under the schoolmaster. Why is that? Because a child cannot voluntarily enter into covenant. So the schoolmaster is teaching this son of the promise, who is of faith, hopefully, what it means to be in that covenant, the terms of the covenant, the nuts and bolts of it. As an adult, when the child comes out from under that schoolmaster and has no longer a need of it, they can make their own free will choice on if they want to covenant with Yahweh, and by covenanting with Yahweh, obey the terms of the covenant exactly the way a spouse would when they take those marriage vows. So when Paul talks about in Galatians not being under the law, he's not talking about obedience to the law. He's talking about the expectation under the law. Like the law lords over you. It dominates you. But why? Because it's expected that you keep it. When you are free and you voluntarily choose out of faith to obey Yahweh's commandments and keep his holy Torah, you are not under the law. You're not. The law is not controlling you. You are voluntarily choosing to keep those commandments. You are in control of that. You are exercising your free will to show obedience to the God you have faith in. This is how Paul is able to say that Sarah, the free woman, is New Jerusalem and the new covenant. When you look at Jeremiah 31, the new covenant's not with the Gentiles. It's with the house of Israel and the house of Judah exclusively. It's written on their hearts. What's written on their hearts? His law. These are people who have committed voluntarily to obey him. And when you read those surrounding chapters, he makes it clear that this is an eternal covenant with those people. So Sarah and Hagar, when we boil it right down and we distill it down to its bare essentials, is telling us the value and the virtue of obedience by free will and free choice versus rote, expected, obligated observance. Now, if you're watching this, which not many people will, but if you're watching this, chances are you are either considered a Christian or you were at some point in your life. Ask yourself, why is that? Chances are you were born in America. America was founded by Christians, even though they say it wasn't. Those Christians taught their children Christianity and on down the line. You were born into a Christian culture, into a Christian nation. More than likely, whatever denomination you are is one that you were born into. Could be one that you married into if you have a spouse who's of a different denomination. Maybe it's the only church in town. Maybe there's only a Methodist church in town and you don't want to drive 2 hours to go to a church that's more theologically sound in your opinion, so you go to the Methodist and you do what they say. Either way, these are all cultural, fleshly reasons to go to a church and to adopt that church's belief system, its catechisms, its creeds. Are you really doing it because of your free will? Have you really looked at the terms of the covenant and understood what you are agreeing to? Or are you Hagar, who is just doing what her master expects her to do and has no say? The flesh. 17 years ago, I decided to be free. I decided to follow after the free woman and voluntarily enter into covenant with the Most High. And even then, I didn't fully understand what I was getting into. I didn't fully understand how covenant works and even really what the terms were. I'm learning more and more every day. But if you're watching this and you are of the mind that Paul said, you are free from Yahweh's commandments, well, you are. You are. If you don't want to keep his commandments, you don't have to. But don't kid yourself that you're in covenant with him, because he's made it clear all through his word that he expects people who are in covenant with him to keep his commandments. Nobody's going to make you keep his commandments. I can't make you. I would love to see you, but I'm certainly not going to make you. He's not going to make you. If he made you, then you would be Hagar. But instead, culture, society, is twisting your arm, kind of leading you down that path of slavery, where you're doing what you're doing out of a sense of rote observance, most likely. I was there. Many people still are. And if a person wants to stay there, then fine. But I challenge you, if you really want to follow the lead of Sarah, except for that one time when she showed the lack of faith in Yahweh and Ishmael came out of it. If you want to follow the example of Abraham, the father of our faith, who obeyed Yahweh's commandments as a fruit of his faith. If you want to live in the New Jerusalem, which comes down to the earth after it has been purified from its uncleanness and its wickedness, then understand that you're choosing a covenant of life that has terms. And those terms, if you'll read Psalm 119, are not burdensome. They're liberating. The book of James calls it the perfect law of liberty. It's not a different law. It's the same law. But how you enter into it and the motivation for your keeping it is what determines if you are Sarah or Hagar. Galatians is all about freedom of choice. And I encourage you, brothers and sisters, if you're watching this, understand that. If you're not ready to get into that covenant, then don't. Joshua told the people, you don't do it. Don't enter into this covenant, because they were going to renew the covenant under Joshua before they entered the promised land. He said, don't do it, guys. Don't. You can't do it. Why? Because he knew. He'd seen them for over 40 years, and he knew how hard-hearted and stubborn and fleshly they were. He knew they were going to enter into the covenant and then break the covenant. And it's better just to not even enter into the covenant if that's what's going to happen. It's like Hosea. He knew what kind of woman Gomer was. Married her anyway because Yahweh told him to. And she runs around on him. Big shocker. Huge surprise. Don't enter into covenant with Yahweh unless you are willing to be faithful to the terms of that covenant, and they have always been obedience to his commandments. I'll leave it at that, guys. I'm going to get in and get some sleep. By the way, Sabbath, weekly Sabbath, the seventh-day Sabbath, is one of those things that Yahweh defines as a sign between him and his people, like a wedding ring. So is Passover. Now, unpopularly, so is circumcision. Those are the three things that Yahweh specifically says are signs between him and his people. Signs of what? Covenant relationship. Christianity ignores 2 out of 3, and Christians these days, an increasing majority, ignore the third. Christianity as an institution doesn't understand what covenant is. So if you're watching this, I'm hoping that you'll dig in, hoping that this was beneficial. As always, I love you guys. This is presented in love. Maybe it's better that I came on and did video so you can hear my voice, see my face. I know sometimes when you type things up, you don't get the little nuances of how it's presented. Things might come across sarcastically, maybe harshly. Guys, this is love. You know, I just want people to see the benefits, the blessings of covenanting with the Most High. Everybody have a nice Sabbath, far and wide. Good night.